Well, lobby group AfriForum has welcomed the introduction of targeted sanctions against South African politicians by the US. Legislation to review the bilateral relationship between the United States and South Africa has passed through a Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives. The bill calls for a comprehensive review of the relationship between the US and South Africa. It also seeks to identify South African government officials and ANC leaders eligible for sanctions. Well, to decode this latest development between the US and South Africa, we are joined by senior researcher at the South African Institute for International Affairs, Gustavo de Carvalho, and Free Market Foundation CEO, David Ansara. Gentlemen, thank you. It's good to have you both on the program.
It's good to be with you.
Gustavo, let me begin with you. How would you describe the deteriorating relations between the United States and South Africa?
It has been coming for a while. And what we've seen in the last couple of years, and particularly since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, but also especially after the case that South Africa brought into the ICJ on genocide, we've seen a lot of Republican voices within Congress coming to that situation. What we had now in April, Representative Jackson from Texas introduced the law, has been discussed in the House Committee of Foreign Relations, and now it's going to the House for voting. I think it is important for us to mention that the process has not ended and is not even near to be closed at the moment. It's still going to be discussed and voted within the House, then going to the Senate Committee of Foreign Relations, and then to another voting. So there is still time to a large degree for South Africa to continue the negotiations. We've seen a lot of backlash and a lot of issues, largely within the Democrats, but as the situation progresses in Gaza and the cases progresses in the ICJ, but also developments with other developing countries, I think there is still a lot for us to see how this process is going to move forward, but it's certainly a concerning step on the bilateral relations with the US and South Africa.
So yeah, so that's, I mean, and I think we must realize that this is not something that has happened or even close to happening. There's still a long journey ahead if it does in fact happen. It's not the first time that this has been tried and it has failed in the past. However, there are louder cries, and we've seen since the beginning of this year, David, that, you know, the relations between South Africa and the United States are not good at all, and there's a lot at risk here, no doubt. Perhaps you want to outline the risks with these deteriorating relations with South Africa, with America, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, so Leanne, I think Gustavo has made a very important point, which is that this is not a trend that began with the Trump administration. Many people have been saying that, you know, Trump has some kind of personal beef with South Africa, but this is a bipartisan issue in Washington, D.C., and I think that that's very important to stress. That's actually one of the few bipartisan issues in which representatives are agreeing. So I think you ask what's at risk. So bear in mind that this takes place along the backdrop of proposed 30% tariffs against South Africa, plus another 10% for BRICS countries, of which South Africa is a part. The United States is South Africa's second largest trade partner. We cannot afford to jeopardize this commercial relationship, especially in the light of the renewal of AGOA, which I think looks unlikely. That's due to expire in September of this year. Bear in mind that that is legislation within now a Republican-controlled House and Senate. So in the current context, that's looking unlikely to be renewed. And that will impact South African manufacturers, particularly in the automotive sector and in the agricultural space. So South Africa is an export-driven economy. We have to maintain good relations with the United States. But we need to ask some very critical questions about ourselves, about South Africa's conduct globally and diplomatically. And I think for the last 20 years, in fact, South Africa has been picking a fight with Washington, D.C., and now seems surprised that Washington is fighting back. We need to look at the signal. This is more than a signal, actually. This is a huge flare that has been sent up. And we do have time, but the window for engagement with the Americans is rapidly closing. the fact that we do not have an ambassador in Washington, D.C., no formal trade delegation has been present there. That speaks to me to a sense of a lack of urgency, a lack of understanding of the gravity of what's happening by the Department of International Relations and Cooperation and the DTIC here in South Africa.
Yeah.
And it seems that the ANC-led government, of which it is the primary coalition partner, seems rather recklessly to be discounting some of the potential costs that could be involved here. We're talking about billions of rands worth of export links here. So I think that we need to take this moment to urgently send a delegation to the United States and to take those demands seriously: the repeal of race-based legislation, the undermining of private property rights through the Expropriation Act, the foreign policy posture aligning with the United States' adversaries such as Hamas, the Iranian regime. Just this week, we saw news that the Taiwanese office in Pretoria is now going to be closed and moved to Johannesburg. You know, that's deliberately going to be antagonizing our allies in Washington.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we hear you and we get your points. But I mean, let's be real. We don't interfere in the US's political stance. We don't interfere in their relations with, let's just say, what's happening in Israel and Palestine. So we don't threaten them, but we get threatened on the other side if we are doing something that we fundamentally believe in terms of approaching the ICJ, calling what is happening there a genocide, and taking our own sovereign stance on certain issues. I'm trying to find it difficult to understand why we are poking Washington when we're a sovereign state. Surely we have the right to do what we want to as a country.
Okay, but I would say that taking one of the United States' key allies, Israel, to the International Criminal Court or the Court of Justice is a deliberate act of aggression against that state, and has not gone unnoticed in the halls of Washington. Look, South Africa is a sovereign country. It can conduct its foreign affairs as it wishes, but it must not be naive about the consequences of those actions.
Yeah.
There is blowback that is coming because of that.
I suppose that's a very big sticking point that we could sit on for a while, because if we do believe that there is a form of genocide happening within Gaza, and many people keep saying the world is watching on and keeping quiet. South Africa has decided not to keep quiet and actually speak out about it, and I suppose history will judge us in terms of what the right or the wrong thing to do was. But I want to come to you, Gustavo, because these are very important issues and certainly big sticking points as well, because this will deter our relationship with the US. We've seen it. You've mentioned AGOA. Are we beyond repair? I know we were saying, or David was saying, send a delegation. We've done that. We sent a delegation. We've had a meeting. It was played out in front of the world's eyes, and I'm not certain it went off too well, but it did happen. I'm not sure it got us anywhere. What are your views? I mean, can we repair this?
I think this is an important question, and perhaps a small correction of what David mentioned earlier. This is certainly not a bipartisan issue. What we saw in the committee in the Foreign Relations, the House Committee on Foreign Relations, was that we had certain Democrat House representatives that voted in favor of passing this law through voting, but still a large majority of Democrats were in disagreement. 16 out of the 22 Democrat representatives felt that this would jeopardize the US relations not only with South Africa, but with the rest of the African continent. And there is a risk for the United States in terms of the continuation of these actions, not only towards South Africa, but to a lot of other developing countries, in terms of its ability and leverage in the long run, if their objective is to push South Africa away from China and Russia. The actions that are currently being taken actually take South Africa into a completely different direction. And because we've seen similar patterns happening in countries like Brazil, in places in Asia, that tends to create a much more unified effect in terms of partnerships that are developed. Now, what can South Africa do in terms of that? The continuation of negotiations on trade issues with the US will continue being critical to that. We've seen the 30% tariffs that have been announced to South Africa and pretty much to the entire world. Specific trade agreements being negotiated and approved that doesn't provide any particular great arrangement. If we see the Japanese agreement that was approved and the impending European Union agreement that is supposed to be approved in the coming days, these are quite problematic in quite a lot of ways. But I think what we're starting to see, and particularly when it comes to the ICJ case, is an increasing number of countries yielding support to the South African case. We've just had a meeting in Colombia for the Hague group of over 30 countries, including not only developing countries, but other allies of the US, including countries like Slovenia and Spain participating in it. We've recently seen countries like Brazil that are now going to officially join the ICJ case, but also, and perhaps more important in this case, in the United States, we're starting to see a shift in domestic public opinion in the US on what they consider to be happening within the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
Is that a genocide or not a genocide? Increasingly, we see a large number of Americans saying that Israel is, if not conducting a genocide, is developing disproportionate force as a means to do that. And the final point that I think is very important for South Africa, it is an important engagement not only between the Department of International Relations and Cooperation and the Department of the State in the US, but particularly a more direct engagement with House Representatives, people that are based in the Hill and dynamics on the Hill. We have a window of opportunity now where the summer recess starts now in August until early September. And that engagement, I think, is fundamentally important for South Africa in terms of ensuring that its narrative and its message comes across, and that the dynamics within the Congress is fundamentally different to the dynamics that what we see within the executive, and particularly this current executive in the United States.
Gentlemen, I'm loath to end this conversation, but I have to. We're ending the program, unfortunately, but we will pick it up. We will certainly get this again. I know there's some strong views here that need to be aired out, but we just touched the tip. David Ansara, Free Market Foundation CEO, and of course the South African Institute of International Affairs' Gustavo Carvalho, talking about the legislation to review bilateral relations between the US and South Africa.